Welcome back to Cop Talk. I'm your host Ben, and today's episode takes a deep dive into the role of local governments in ongoing cattle farming conflicts. In past episodes, we've heard from farmers and residents, each having valid concerns. But what about the authorities who are caught in the middle of these disputes? Today, we explore the complexities of local governments that are trying to mediate between farmers and communities. From the government's perspective, these conflicts are far from simple. On one hand, we have farmers who quite literally provide the backbone of South Korea's agricultural economy. They need room for expansion, especially given rising costs associated with operating farms. On the other hand, local communities raise worries over environmental impacts, odors, and noise, essentially how these farms impact quality of life. This is the challenge to local governments, finding a delicate balance between competing interests. Let's begin with the legal framework. Local governments are tasked with enforcing national environmental laws while also implementing their own local ordinances to manage livestock operations. This includes ensuring that farms comply with regulations on waste disposal, odor control, and environmental impact assessments. According to a recent study, complaints about odors from livestock farms are one of the most common environmental issues that local governments face. To address these concerns, many local governments have introduced restricted livestock zones, which regulate the distance between farms and residential areas. In some regions, this buffer zone can be as large as 2,000 meters, depending on the size of the farm and the type of the livestock. These regulations aim to reduce the impact of farming on residents, but they also limit the farmer's ability to expand. This legal balancing act is particularly challenging. On one side, it's necessary to protect residents from pollution, but over-regulating can hurt farmers, who are essential to the local economy. The government's role here is to protect both the environment and the farming industry. Another layer of complexity comes from the pressure local governments face from communities. Residents often feel their concerns are not being taken seriously, especially when it comes to the environmental and social impact of large-scale cattle farms. These rural areas, once quiet and peaceful, can change dramatically when large farms expand. Large officials are often caught in the crossfire. Town hall meetings and petitions from residents demanding stricter controls on farm expansion are common. These situations create a tough position for local governments, which must uphold the legal rights of farmers while also respecting the demands of their constituents. But it's not just about the environment. Many rural areas in South Korea rely heavily on agriculture as the backbone of their economy. Cattle farming in particular plays a vital role. According to a recent report, local governments are concerned that overly strict regulations could drive farmers out of business, leading to a decline in local tax revenue and loss of jobs. This economic pressure means that local governments must tread carefully. While there is a need to regulate environmental issues, they must also ensure that farmers can continue to operate profitably. Some local governments have started offering financial incentives for farmers to adopt more sustainable farming practices. These incentives help farmers modernize their equipment and upgrade to environmentally friendly technologies that control odor and manage waste more effectively. Land use is another major concern for local governments. As rural areas develop, the demand for residential spaces increases, sometimes clashing with the needs of farmers who require large areas of land for expansion. In many areas, farms existed long before residential developments. But as people move to these rural communities, they often expected the peace and quiet of countryside living without the presence of large livestock operations. Local governments must balance these land use conflicts, ensuring both agricultural development and residential growth. In some cases, zoning laws have been introduced to create clear distinctions between agriculture and residential areas. However, these regulations don't always solve the issue, as many farms sit in mixed-use zones where such clear separations aren't possible. So, how do local governments manage these competing demands? Some are turning to green farming initiatives, where farmers are encouraged to adopt sustainable practices that minimize environmental impact. For example, advanced waste management systems and odor control technologies are being promoted to reduce pollution while allowing farms to continue operating. By upgrading their farms with new technologies, farmers can comply with environmental standards and address some of the concerns raised by local residents. In some areas, local governments are even working with farmers to install monitoring systems that track the environmental impact of farms in real time. These systems measure things like air and water quality to ensure that farms are not violating regulations. If a problem is detected, both the government and the farmer can act quickly to resolve it. These technological solutions are still being tested in various regions, but they show promise in reducing the environmental footprint of cattle farming. However, the future of cattle farming in South Korea remains uncertain. Local governments are caught in a difficult position. On one side, farmers need to grow to survive. On the other, communities are pushing for stricter controls to protect their way of life. There is no simple solution, but as the technology improves and both sides work towards a compromise, there is a hope that a sustainable path forward can be found. In our next episode, we'll continue exploring some of these solutions and innovations in greater detail. If you have any thoughts or experiences to share, leave us a comment wherever you're listening. Your insights could help shape the ongoing conversation. I'm Ben, and thank you for joining me today on Cow Talk. See you later.